if you're familiar with it, you know that I love creating these forms that are kind of like abstract, but at the same time, they almost look like something. There's like the forms are in the space between abstract and representational. If you look at it, you might see like, you know, a giraffe or like a dancing woman or
A lion?
something, a lion, yeah. And so that's really on purpose because I love exploring that space because it really lets the person who's viewing the art, it really lets them activate their imagination. It really lets them fill it in themselves with their own subjective experiences, with their own like person, right?
The SquiggleDAO podcast is brought to you by Niftyfy. If you need liquidity, instead of selling your NFT, you can get a loan. Niftyfy is the most battle-tested and secure NFT lending protocol. You can borrow ETH, USDC, or DAI from lenders using your NFTs as collateral in a trustless peer-to-peer fashion. By being peer-to-peer, you can get better terms on specific or rare NFTs. And there is no liquidation risk. As long as you repay the loan before maturity, your NFT is yours. Head over to niftyfy.com and access the app today.
Welcome to the SquiggleDAO podcast. My name is Jared, and online you can find me as Jared_Pause. I'm the founder of the 8NAP Digital Asset Fund and the art forward platform 8NAP Art.
And I'm Nifty. I lead finance, acquisitions, and NFT DeFi for the DAO. Our guest today is Emily Xie. Emily is a visual artist living in New York City. Her work has been exhibited internationally in cities such as Singapore, London, and LA. She also presented her artwork at the United Nations headquarters in New York City as part of the Woman Trailblazer Award. Previously, she worked as a software engineer. It's an honor to have her with us today. Emily, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor being here.
Of course. Before starting recording, we were talking about how demanding is the balancing the creative part of your role versus paying attention to collectors, communities, or recording podcasts like this one. So how do you try to balance those two worlds?
Oh gosh. Yeah, as we were talking about, it is pretty difficult. It is difficult to balance not just these things, but honestly, everything that being an artist demands of you. I think the thing that I struggle with the most is making sure that I always carve out time for the creative process, and that time has to be uninterrupted. Because when you're creating, you really have to get into this state of flow where it feels like it's just you and the artwork that you're making, and the world around you just kind of like melts away, right? And I think that in that flow state, that's when you kind of you're at your most creative because you're making all of these connections that seemingly come out of nowhere, and you're coming up with all these interesting ideas, and you're just so focused on the details of what's in front of you. And yeah, that's challenging to maintain that state when you also have to do things like speak with galleries, speak with platforms, speak with your collectors and your community, and this is all so important as well. That's what's so difficult about it. Like, this is all really important, and so it's really about just carving out time and being extremely strategic with your schedule. So for myself, that typically means, like, if I'm going to do meetings, I try to do them all on one day. I try to have days where I'm not doing anything except for creating, because I think the worst is when you have like a meeting, and then like 2 hours later you have another meeting. In that 2 hours, it's not enough time to actually get into that state of flow to create. And of course, like interviews and podcasts, these also take up a lot of time, and I'm really happy to do them. They're so important because, like, as an artist, I really want to get my work out there into the world. I really want to create a visual that is like iconic in a way, right? And interviews and podcasts, this is a great way to get your work out, your style out in front of a much larger audience. And for people to discover you, and that kind of this is also something that takes up a lot of time as well, because there's kind of like lead up to it where you're maybe thinking about the questions. You definitely have to make sure you get like a get some nice get a nice cup of tea in your system to make sure that you're able to be lively and speak well about your art. So yeah, I think it's all about strategic planning. Long story short.
I know. I love that you're using the blocking. It's something I need to implement more because I'm with social media and trying to be ever present for people. It's like that from Up the movie, like the squirrel moment. It's like squirrel, squirrel. Like you're just always all over the place. So
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that, and I also it's admirable that you're looking to find the balance, right? And
yeah,
be discoverable because I think it is important. You create very beautiful art, but it also needs to be seen by people in order to be truly appreciated. So it's an incredible balance. I do think that artists are low key, little entrepreneurs in their own right because finding that
yeah.
balance of creativity and discoverability is an insane. But one of the things that I did want to double click on here is like, where do you find your inspiration, and what is your ideation process once you have the inspiration?
I think there's a couple of ways that I approach inspiration. One of them is like a very passive way where I just drink in the world around me. Like, I love finding inspiration in very material things, as you probably know from my art. Like, I love fashion. I love personal style and clothing textiles. And so I'll go into stores just as part of my day-to-day life, and I'll just really look at the fabrics in front of me or the patterns, the text, like the uh, honestly, clothing has some of the most incredible pattern design. So I take a lot of inspiration from that. Honestly, like I'll like stop just because I'm so so enamored with like a wallpaper that's in front of me, and I'll like go up to it and I'll examine it and look at it, and all my friends who are with me think I'm absolutely crazy. But it's just like so so striking, some of these patterns out in the world. And so that's kind of a more passive form of inspiration. Other times I'll do something a little more active, like going to a museum and wanting to kind of be inspired, wanting to sort of drink up the art that I see there, hoping to find yeah, some spark in those giants that have come before me. And so when I do that, I'll be like studying the compositions in an image, or just thinking about like the techniques that they must be using, like how um, yeah, so stuff like that. But also, like, I'm also actively I have like this inspiration process before I begin any series, where I'll just, aggregate images as well. And that's like an important part of my practice, because a lot of times it, in a very subconscious way, brings to the surface like what I'm currently really excited about. Sometimes it's hard for me to know until I start like, gravitating towards, images that are just, that I find interesting for some reason. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, your inclusion of textiles and different patterning is absolutely amazing. I think it's one of the things that has drawn me into your art because it, it's incredible, honestly, the way you've included all of this, and you've been able to. I always go back to the Smoke and Fire palette from Memories of Qilin, because it's just something so beautiful about the way the patterns hit with the colors and it got blended. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful paletting that you do, but like that one in particular, the moment I saw it, I was like, I fell deeply, deeply in love because it was something like I'd never seen before. So if you can't tell, I love your overall aesthetic, and and I think that I'm not alone on this, right? Like a lot of diamond-handed collectors have put together amazing sets. A guest of the pod was DC Investor, and I was scrolling through his Deca gallery in preparation for this, and I loved how he put together some amazing triptychs uh, of your work by certain palettes, and that had a deep resonance to me because like your palettes are distinctly beautiful, but people can collect around it in a meaningful fashion that is unique to them. right, and display it in a fashion that they're very proud of. So what? So where am I going with this? The overall, I think that there's like a consistent patterning and aesthetic to your style, right? Like everything to me is like distinctly Emily, but each project has its own personality, which I really, really admire. So I guess the question here, after all the rambling, is, you know, we talked about like what inspires you, but what do you hope others when seeing your work, or what do you hope to inspire from them?
Well, for one, I was really like, thank you for sharing kind of your reaction to seeing, for example, the Smoke and Fire palette. Like, that's exactly the reaction that I hope to inspire in people when they see my art. Um, I want there to be some sort of emotional resonance, um, whether it's from the colors alone, like, color is really powerful. It really speaks so much. Like, has the ability to convey an emotion with just one color, even. And so, yeah, I am looking for emotional resonance. But I also, a lot of my work, I if you're familiar with it, you know that I love creating these forms that are kind of like abstract, but at the same time, they almost look like something. There's like the forms are in the space between abstract and representational. If you look at it, you might see like, you know, a giraffe or like a dancing woman or
A lion?
something, a lion, yeah. And so that's really on purpose because I love exploring that space because it really lets the person who's viewing the art, it really lets them activate their imagination. It really lets them fill it in themselves with their own subjective experiences, with their own like person, right? And that's what's really powerful for me is like I want my art, like I want to connect with other people through my artwork. And I don't like I just think that that's letting someone sort of project a part of themselves onto an artwork is such a powerful way to do it. It almost becomes like a two-way communication through a visual. So I actually love it when people, they tweet to me like, or they message me like, I see, a sailboat in this image, and it reminds me of the times that I spent as a child with, my parents or something. Like I love those kind of stories. I love hearing that. Yeah, that's what I hope to inspire when people look at it. Yes.
No, I've spent hours looking at Memories of Qilin in that sense. I mean, there's obviously like TLP collected what I think is the famous lion looking one.
Oh yeah.
But I have a buddy who collected one because it reminded him of a horse. I found some that I thought looked like a warrior or hummingbirds, and it's
Yeah.
just it gets to be a really fun collection because it's not just aesthetically beautiful, but there's a level of discoverability when you really start to be immersed in the collection.
Yeah. I hope people, it's not just an image, but these collections feel like mini universes to them. That's what I really hope people get from the art.
And taking a step back, you built a career as a software engineer. And what are the main lessons you took from those years, and how have those influenced your art?
I guess like the thing I got the most from being a software engineer, of course, was like coding skills, and just the confidence to be able to figure out, all like the majority of things, almost anything when it comes to programming, kind of on my own even. And that's been really like it is it's been amazing to be able to apply a skill that you've been honing for so many years into kind of um, into a more creative application of it. Um, it really is, yeah, it's been amazing. Um, but I also think that software engineering teaches you a bunch of other skills that's useful when it comes to art, like patience, I would say. I've spent hours and hours and hours, like, any software engineer will say they spent hours and hours debugging something only to find that it was like, I don't know, something silly like missing, like a white space in a regex or something that was unexpected. And so being able to kind of like patiently sit through and hammer on something until you figure it out, that's been extremely useful for generative art, I would say. Because, if you have a vision and you really want to move towards it, sometimes it takes a lot of patience. You have to be able to sit down and figure it out. It might take a lot of work and a lot of frustration. Being able to sit through that is extremely important. Trying to think what other things it's taught me so much, right? Breaking problems down into smaller components. That's also, of course, directly applicable to generative art, but also to just life. um, and I guess like being able to architect things. I guess that kind of goes into that, being able to look at something from a high level perspective, and then breaking it down into smaller components. And then, strangely enough, also like collaboration. Like a lot of people have this idea that being a software engineer means that you're kind of just sitting there by yourself, just as like a code monkey or something. But there's actually a lot of people work in software engineering, especially as you get more senior. And so I think that's been directly translatable into, an inherent part of being an artist, working with people, doing kind of like releases with platforms or galleries, doing stuff like working, interacting with you folks right now. So yeah, it's been, I'm very privileged to be able to apply all of these skill sets into art making, and yeah.
That's a skill to be able to zoom in on the details, accomplish what you need to, but also zoom out in the collaboration. I think that collaborative effort is one of the most underutilized points for most people, right? Meaning that collaborative, like Web3 in itself is inherently collaborative. It eradicates barriers to entry. It's all about autonomy, and whether it's relationship driven, like you talked about, to institutions or even with other artists. Nifty had the pleasure of going to Marfa last year. I know, Emily, you've been there, but when you're able to get this collective in one area, and just I've enjoyed just being a fly on the wall and listening to artists talk, and it was just it felt very collaborative, where it wasn't very me versus you. It was like, hey, like we're all working on this bigger thing that is digital art, generative art, and it just felt like something in the air. I don't know how anybody who's listening and hasn't been there, I'm gonna sound like a little wingnut, but I don't know how to describe it. But there's something in the air there in Marfa, or maybe something in the water that allows for this really magical moment, and it's just been fun to watch on the artist side. But anyways, I appreciate you sharing about your patience and the practice. It's really admirable. But you do talk about your projects you just mentioned being mini universes, which I thought was a really, really powerful way to phrase each project, because people can be immersive and yet it's still somewhat cohesive. So I thought we'd just kind of like do an open dialogue about some questions and kind of go into rapid fire. We'll do rapid fire later on, but on some of your projects, if you don't mind. One of the ones that I am really drawn to, besides my love for Memories, is away from the keyboard. And this one was really amazing to me because I had the ability to mint it at proof, but you did a really great job of storytelling, and you really leaned into it. So anybody who has not seen the video should really go into Proof's website and look it up about the meaning behind it. But you took this, what was distinctively your style, and you're able to really weave the collector or the observer through the process, both digitally and physically, of how you got to it. And it to me, it showed that your craft is not just in code, like you said, or being like that keyboard monkey. So using your words, it was more about like digging into it and understanding like how it was all supposed to come together. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that, A, and then B, is there anything that like maybe in that project you came away with that maybe you didn't anticipate?
From the Away from Keyboard project, I guess for a little bit of context, what that project is I was approached by Grails, the proof team. I was approached by the proof team to submit an artwork for Grails, and it was very open-ended. I could do whatever I wanted, and so I decided to print out my patterns onto pieces of paper, and then from there, sort of cut, like physically cut and paste uh, the bits and pieces into an actual physical collage. And I was sort of guided by the compositions of, my algorithms, right? And so it was a different way of interacting with my algorithms. Like I felt at the time that I wanted a break from programming, like from just doing purely code generated art. I really wanted to work with my hands. That gave me the opportunity to do it and to also connect with my algorithms in a different way, to see them in a different light, to be able to touch and sort of manually craft out the compositions. That's a very different it's a very different experience. Like I think what I took away from that was just a sort of like more instinctual understanding of these kind of like shapes and forms that you know comprise some of my works, because like being able to manually interact with it's just different, like I think it just lended so much more of a just a different perspective, a different understanding, and kind of like tied together this kind of digital physical kind of like um, this kind of this bridge between the digital and physical that I've been trying to get at with my work. I've been trying to meld those two worlds and seeing how they can kind of seep into one another. And so, yeah, like I think if anything, it was just kind of an illuminating experience for myself.
And for any of those who are interested and inspired by this, sad to say, I just looked it up. Sorry, I'm running 3 screens here. There are none available for further proof of how diamond-handed a lot of your collectors are, but it is an edition of 41, and you can just look it up on OpenSea or whatever your preferred platform is under Away from Keyboard. But sadly, you'll have to probably go beg to pry it out of somebody's hands.
And you've mentioned a lot about collage, and I totally agree. Sometimes we live in such digital worlds that mixing the physical and the digital, it's such a nice feeling. And I think, if I might be wrong, but I think that your work, Doves Implied, also has some collage work in it. Can you talk about the work and the why it was exhibited in the United Nations? What did it mean to exhibit that work for you?
Yeah. So I guess a little more context around that project. Um, uh, I was approached by the peacekeeping department in the UN for this award ceremony that they were holding. They wanted to commemorate the ceremony. This is the Trailblazer Award. They wanted to commemorate it with an art piece. And somehow they found me. I think they like when I asked, like, how did you find me? They said that they were looking specifically for an artist, a digital artist that kind of worked with collage in New York City. And I think when you shrink down those parameters, there aren't a ton of folks that that fit that criteria. And they saw my art and really liked it. And so, what an honor it was to be able to create a work for that ceremony at the UN. And for that, it was an award for a woman in peacekeeping. For that piece, I wanted it to be about peace, right? So it was these abstract doves that you can kind of see taking off in flight. But the thing is, this trailblazer that it commemorates, it's like, the trailblazer embodies these characteristics of courageousness, of dynamism, of just, bold, of boldness, right? And so it could have been easy to make like a very calm image, but I wanted something kind of energetic. So the lines and the curves throughout are quite vigorous in the image, and then the colors are also very bright, and it's a little busy in a way. So that was kind of what I was trying to convey with that piece. And then, of course, they gave me the opportunity to speak at the UN, to speak a little bit more about the piece and my practice. And that was probably one of the more surreal experiences I've had in my life. I'm just very happy I didn't pass out. um, and yeah, so I think like that is collage. I think part of the reason why I wanted to, why it was important that it was kind of in this collage format too, this textile format too, is because these, especially textile art, that's been kind of a, you know, of an art form that's been marginalized in the art world. And so using that was really important because it kind of shed light into the purpose of the Trailblazer Award, which is to commemorate a woman, like to commemorate women's work, which often goes unseen.
By the way, we listened to the UN speech, and you did an amazing job. So I didn't see any nerves or anything. So it was really, really good.
Oh, thank you. I was definitely nervous.
But it was impressive. One of the ones that we cannot miss from the discussion is Memories. Can you talk a little bit about your process and why did you create, I think, the most special project for many collectors from you?
It kind of thinks about this idea of memory. Like when you look at an artwork, like it's like you can almost see it, but then you suddenly don't, kind of in the way that like a memory in your mind is so fleeting, like you almost see it, but then it kind of like dissipates. Like when you try to conjure up the image of like someone, it's like you can see it and you understand the gist of it and what it's all about, but like it's just, it kind of falls away, just like a distant memory in your mind. And then also why the Qilin, like I always love talking about why the Qilin is such an important like part of the name. The Qilin, because it talks about that chimeric quality, like Qilin is like a creature in, Chinese or East Asian mythology, that has different body parts of different animals. So it's like kind of a, shape-shifting kind of creature that pays homage to the shape-shifting nature of the series. And memories part of the name is there to reinforce that kind of folkloric memory-based aspect of the series that I want people to dive into. And then also, of course, the Qilin came from actually my mom. Like when I was showing her the outputs of this, like I asked her, like, what do you think should be the name of it? And she kept, like, the first thing she said was Qilin. It reminds me of the Qilin. Just not because like a Qilin is figuratively depicted, but because the essence of it is there.
As much as I've dug into Memories, it was a really cool point to hear about the integration of your mother and the shape shifting. I know, but just for others, it's really, you should take a look at the entirety of the collection, because the way you zoom in and out, the way the shapes and patterns come together, there's something very harmonious about it. And with the Qilin being a shape shifting entity, it makes so much sense, because like we talked about earlier, that cohesiveness of a collection. You see a Memories, it's Emily's Memories of Qilin, and yet each one, there's 1,024 outputs, and each one is distinctly unique. And I think you did a really great job of being able to zoom in, zoom out. You have the focals, which have like very low complexity. You have the flock, which is like, very rare but beautiful in its own right. So like when you start to dig into these traits, you have a greater appreciation for the complexity, and that shape-shifting nature makes a lot of sense. I will say that was all generative art. We're battling this age of AI, so to speak, and I think where others maybe push back on it, I really admire how you've leaned into it. And I guess being more of a technician, the Nifty mentioned the software engineer. We talked about that. Uh, I have always looked at AI as a tool within the toolkit, just as there's like a paintbrush and canvas. Um, so you've started using AI as a tool. Like what is that? How has that unlocked anything within your creativity, and has it had any impact on maybe execution?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. And by the way, I totally agree with you. Like AI is definitely just another tool. And I think it depends how you use that tool to, enhance your craft. I think like one could easily just like, have Midjourney create an image and call it good. But want to, I wanted to connect with it a little bit more, like I wanted to make sense of the tool. And I think that's part of an artist's job, right? Like it's to make sense of the world around us. It's to understand it, it's to explore it, it's to lean into things, right? And so I think with AI, I wanted to do that. I've always been interested in AI. I got my master's in computational science and engineering. I actually specialized, like my coursework was kind of focused around uh, uh, like I was exploring machine learning, visual computing, and I think like so it's an interesting technology to me, um, and in the way I've used it is I will tend to produce like um, you know using image-based models. I'll create like a folder full of images, and then I will look through each image, and I will take my Apple Pen and I'll cut out bits and pieces from each image, and then I'll collage it into one final image. And for me, that's like my way of kind of making sense of this, this whole AI thing, because AI has supposedly kind of like automated away an artist's hand. But how can I sort of reclaim that? That's my way of reclaiming it. And so, um, you know, then I'll, of course, like once I have like a collaged composition, I'll then like run it through my algorithms to assign color, texture, to create unity in the image. Because like at that point, like that collage is like very messy looking. It's very disjunct and doesn't really make sense. But that collage process allows me to create new compositions, which has unlocked a lot for me. Because I think like, with generative art, like algorithmic art, it's hard to create new compositional forms that you haven't seen before. Or, I mean, it's one does it, but it takes so much effort, and it's really hard to unlock new sort of compositions, because there's foundational techniques that a lot of people draw upon. So with AI, you can sort of create compositions that break out of that box, right? Of course, like the way to create new compositional, like create new interesting compositions in generative art is to mash together a lot of different techniques to create something new and kind of unexpected. But with AI, it's like almost it's a different way of doing it, right? Um, and so that's what, yeah, and it's really allowed me to kind of um, expand my one-of-one practice. Like that's how I tend to do my one-of-ones right now. And I love that process because it also feels great. Like I get to work with my hands. Like, I mean, of course, with a I get to digitally work with my hands using like an Apple Pen on my iPad. And that also feels really good. Um, I did it before with manually cutting out and, away from keyboard, manually cutting out pieces, arranging them, and kind of gluing. And of course, that like it's just another way of kind of exploring that cutting, composing process. And yeah, I love it because it also comes with the benefit of you don't have to deal with like the glue, and it also remains digitally native, which I consider myself. Um, yeah, I'm just so excited about it. It's a lot of fun.
I think that people will look back on it as a real game changer. I mean, I use ChatGPT for ideation, right? It's not to say any of my ideas are not my own, but it's just fun to be able to have somebody to process data and be that tool for you. So I think that's awesome. And I think that it's when I first heard about it for some of your one-of-one work, I got really excited. I thought it was amazing that you're able to integrate it into your art and it becomes part of your journey, part of your story. But it's also like uniquely Emily. Like you've been able to lean into it in a fashion that's very connected on your own front.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those words. I do. What I do like about it is that it does feel uniquely like myself. So thank you for recognizing that.
It's 100% you.
And talking about uniquely Emily, one of the things that resonates me a lot from your work is your palettes that are easily recognizable, easily Emily. Even if you take the color combination outside of your particular piece, probably you would be able to recognize that comes from Emily. And we were talking before about Smoke and Fire. Before recording the podcast, we were discussing with Jared about Hong Bao, Blood Moon, Intrepid. And how do you choose and combine those colors and form those palettes?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, thank you for enjoying my palettes. I spend so much time on them. I absolutely love the palette creation process. Like I could spend like just days and days and days on picking colors and fine tuning them and enhancing them, which I do. But oftentimes when I'm thinking about like palette creation, it's to support this idea of like creating the mini universes, right? Like each palette should kind of bring out or convey like a mood. Like I don't want a random combination of colors. Like I want the palette to serve a purpose. Like Smoke and Fire should remind you of that smoke and fire. Like it should look like a cloud of smoke with like, like peeps of like fire, like embers kind of poking through. It has this atmospheric quality to it, right? And that, of course, changes the story that when you see a piece in Smoke and Fire versus Intrepid, the piece becomes two different things. And that's really important for me, that each palette has its own, like, can really change the story of a piece. But oftentimes when I am choosing palettes, that's what I'm thinking about. So with Memories of Qilin, for example, I was like, okay, I think I started off with like, I'm going to create like a water-based palette because I want people to maybe conjure up scenes of like the seaside or oceans, or see like sea monsters and what they're seeing. Then I wanted to create like a forest-based theme because like I think it'd be interesting if people saw like, woodland creatures or, dragons because of the greens that kind of like are suggestive of these things. And then of course I wanted to create like a red-based theme. Like if we're going to build around all the elements, the natural elements, because I wanted people to, see something that, is, fiery, like maybe, and also like red's an amazing color because it conveys so much. It's like super passionate. It's very like, it's such a bold color. I love red. So I think like that's typically how I'm architecting palettes. And of course, like you have to look at it as pieces of a greater whole as well, right? Like if I have already like a blue and orange based palette, I don't want to create another blue and orange based palette. Or if I have one that conveys a certain emotion, I don't want to like lean too much into that direction unless that's intentionally part of the story. And so yeah, and sometimes I'll look at old paintings, for example, for inspiration. Picasso was a master of color, and so I struggle with purple, for instance. And so I definitely looked at some of his works for inspiration on like, how can I combine purple in a way that like looks interesting, makes sense. And yeah, and then from there, it's there's a lot of fine tuning, like literally changing the color, couple of shades, it changes the whole palette significantly. So it's like, I've definitely spent like on one palette like full day tuning it and going crazy. Like I remember at one point I texted my friend, "Hey, does this?" Because I'd been fine tuning this. You know what it was? It was the Elemental palette in OffScript. I fine tuned that color for the yellow in that for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I was just like, I don't even know what color this is anymore. And I texted my friend and I asked her like, this looks yellow, right? And she's like, yeah, this looks like yellow. And I'm like, it doesn't look like, brown or anything. Like, are you sure this looks like red, blue, and yellow to you? And she texted me back. She said, Emily, go take a walk outside.
That's awesome.
But it's like an obsessive process. And I actually love it because I just get so like I just get so like sucked into it.
I would say Elemental in OffScript is low-key one of the most amazing pieces. I've been hunting one down for the better part of a year. It is phenomenal. I mean, so well executed.
Thank you.
So brilliant yellow choice.
Thank you. I'm glad it doesn't look brown.
Yeah, I was going to say same lines that really shows that all that effort and thought process behind the colors. We were saying that it's one of the things that we can easily recognize from your work. So great work.
And I will say, for any of those interested in memories, I'm always obsessed with non-metadata stuff. It's kind of how Nifty and I actually connected overall, was non-metadata traits in Squiggles. But within each palette, the background color can change in Memories, and it's something fun that I've been collecting around, because I think that as this rises within prominence, there's even like sub rarities, if you want to call it that. Like going back to the forest, like I love the pieces with the brown background, whereas there's more of a greenish background for the majority. But then you look at the green and there's two different colors of green, right? There's more of your traditional forest green and then more of a minty green. So like you can really dig into it. And I think the way, again, as Nifty said, your ability to scale it appropriately and fine tune the composition and colors is just, it's amazing.
Thank you. And thank you for picking up on that aspect of the series. I definitely didn't expose that as a trait, just because I didn't feel like it needed to be. But it really amazes me to see that there are folks out there like you who noticed it and cared about it. Thank you for paying so much attention to that series.
And we have a few minutes left. We have some rapid fire questions. We always like to mention that the questions are rapid fire. The answers don't need to be. First one is, you've mentioned in some interviews about your role as a collector, and we are really interested in knowing what you as an artist look for in a piece when you are collecting a piece or adding a piece to your collection.
Oftentimes for one, I love supporting artists that maybe like I just like them as people. That's really important to me, like the story behind the artist, like what are they trying, like how do they bring themselves into their work. And then I think I just look for what like resonates kind of visually with me, like within their body of work, like I'll it's like an immediate kind of intuition thing, like, oh, this is really, beautiful, or there's something about this. That's kind of how I typically approach it. I'm sure that a lot of collectors also have the same way of collecting. But of course, there are times where, like, if I'll just kind of be amazed at what their algorithm might produce, and I especially love it when I look at a series and I just don't know how they did it, right? Because as I mentioned, there's a lot of like standard foundational generative art techniques, and I love it when people kind of go outside of that. And I'm just like, what is this? Like, it's not, it's not like a yeah, it's hard for me to tell. Yeah, I
Makes
love that.
total sense, and love that answer. Like you can see behind the image how it was created and how interesting that is. Love that.
I also think it's amazing to have that emotional connection. I mean, I wasn't around for Fidenzas and some of the early works, but again, not to just keep giving you a bunch of flowers, but Memories was the first collection that I had like a visceral emotional connection to, one that I just couldn't like get away from. I mean, I was obsessing over it and buying pieces from like the train. I mean, I couldn't stop
Oh,
looking at the collection. It
thank
was
you.
amazing. Yeah. So that's cool to hear that you collect around something very similar.
You've talked a lot about generating outputs, collaging those outputs, or even using AI to generate output. Any happy accidents during that process of refining the algorithm?
Yeah, I think I'm struggling to come up with like a happy accident that's like changed the course of like a series, but I think like um usually in some details, like there'll be an accident that I'm just like, oh, this is kind of cool. You know what like one example would be like in off script, there's like one sort of like texture that's a little translucent. It's kind of like you can see a little bit of what's underneath, and that was an accident. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'll keep this. But for the most part, like I kind of wish I was in the camp where like I was making something and it is totally different. Like I make a mistake or something and it looks totally different, and I kind of um, roll with it. But unfortunately, that doesn't tend to happen for me.
And what about once the algo has been released? Any outputs that have surprised you or that come to mind?
Oh yeah. I mean, the lion for one. I was just shocked that like all these components came together to create such a visual of a lion. Like I was expecting abstract versus, like somewhere in between abstract and representational, but I wasn't expecting something so kind of like figural. And the horse is also another one that just looks like very um, obvious. I was like, wow, that's a horse. Not just like in terms of the shapes, but like the colors, like that sea dune palette. The browns just fell in all the right places to create an actual horse. And then, the whisper I thought was a really beautiful one. I don't know if you know what that one is. It's like a, you know, um, series of like kind of
I,
thin
I
curved
think
lines.
Curated owns it.
I think actually I want to say that Crypto Tax Guy owns it.
Could be.
Yeah, maybe there's a different one. But it's like I was surprised that the lines fell so kind of like perfectly.
But the lion in particular is it was one that when I saw it sell, it was over 5 ETH, and I think the floor was like under 1 at the time. I was like, why is this one amazing? It's that and again it's that when something speaks to somebody, it's that unintended output. It's just something magical when it comes together. It's insane.
I love it too because also like I love lions in general.
That one is a grail for sure.
And what's funny, I'll have to pull it up, but Astum owns my co-host on Collector's Corner owns the horse one, and he bought it
Yeah,
distinctively because it's a horse. It's a Koten one. I'll have to look it up, but
I think it was Sea
it is.
Dune. I want to say.
Oh, is it Sedun? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well, anyways, we'll pull it up and we'll put the image in there because it's incredible. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
you can see it. Yeah.
Do you have any book recommendations that you would recommend to the listenership to provide them max value from Emily's perspective?
One book that I'm thinking of immediately, it's a fiction book. It's 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I think what I really love about that book is that it has this atmospheric kind of quality where things are kind of like time is distorted, things are morphing into one another. It just feels like it's very like, um, alive and full of like the world is alive and full of like these mysteries and mysticisms. And it's like magical surrealism, right? So I love that book because I feel like it's it speaks to me in terms of how I appreciate sort of approach my own artwork in a way, in the sort of storytelling and magic that I'm trying to bring. Maybe one could rephrase that question as like, what books do you recommend any books? And how it like maybe it connects to your practice. I don't know.
No, that's awesome. I love that because I mean we've asked the question to, people more financially minded and they have like economy books, and we've asked it to, then there's like somebody recommended, the book by Seneca. Like there's just, the Daily Habits. So like there's just it's kind of been fun, and even quite honestly, like I've ended up buying most of the books that I hadn't read already because I love getting into other people's perspective, going back to that hive mind, the community base, the collaboration. The more we share, and I think the more we grow together.
You know what? I got I'll give you two books. So aside from
Sure.
that nonfiction book, one book that comes to mind is The Nature of Code by Dan Schiffman. That was something I read a long time ago. But in terms of like understanding maybe generative art and how to create natural systems with them, if you're looking to understand it, that's a great book. It's technical though, and if you're looking to learn, that's a fantastic book. So it's really great. It'll take you step by step on the building blocks of like how to simulate like a particle system, or how to do like a flow field, that kind of thing. And Dan
That's
Schiffman's
awesome.
one of my favorite educators out there on generative art.
One of these days, I intend to actually dig into algorithmic art and creating myself, probably under a synonym, but maybe that will be the basis one of these days. So, final question, because I know your time is valuable and we're running over. What's the best advice you've received in the NFT space?
It was actually Aaron. I think I want to say Aaron Penney, if I recall, that gave me the advice. If it ever gets to be too much, take a step back. Um, and I think like you kind of know that, but to hear someone say it, um, it's really powerful because the space, is a little, it's crazy. It's a bit of a wild west right now. I think I think I've described it before as kind of like, uh, it's like constantly changing. It's like almost like a desert sand, right? Like where the landscape looks entirely different from one day to the next. And trying to keep up with that, trying to build on top of that kind of shaky foundation is exhausting. And also it's full of questions. Like you just don't know, am I supposed to do this? Is this like the best choice? Is this the best, way to release this art? Like there's just so many questions, and it often gets really overwhelming. Like because there's so many questions, you can't even begin to answer, what's correct or not. And I think just being able to disconnect is really important. I have a lot of kind of parameters around that, but it's also because that's the reason why, sometimes if someone tries to reach out to me, um, I might take a while to respond. It's because I'm purposely disconnected. Um, but it also helps with being able to focus on your art. If you just let things, if you're not so plugged in to the space itself, you can focus on the art.
What are tricks do you use to disconnect, to unplug in a world where it's like 24/7 mobile screens? How do you do it?
Yeah. Oh, I don't have things on my phone. Like I don't have Twitter on my phone. I don't have Discord on my phone. I found that when I did have it on my phone, like I would wake up in the mornings and then I would be scrolling
Yeah.
for a long time. And that was just such a time suck. So I deleted it. And I'll only install it like if I'm at a conference or something. So yeah, that's like one really good way to disconnect. And also I don't even have Twitter on the same computer that I make the art on. Like I don't have Discord,
Smart.
Twitter on the same computer. Um, I'm lucky, of course. I have the luxury of having like 2 computers, but it's very helpful for me.
I like that, especially because the time suck plus sets the mood, sets the tone for the day. If you start scrolling the news, the comments, and suddenly you are in a different mood, different energy.
Yeah, and I also think crypto Twitter especially can be kind of um, emotional. Like it's a lot of people venting a lot of feelings, expressing frustrations, and I think that if you get into that mindset, it can easily contaminate, I think, your day to start off with. And
I can't imagine you as an artist, the amount of comments, opinions, and everything you get. So requests and why the floor is down.
No, there was one more trick that I kind of did, but I don't remember what it is. Oh, and then there's one thing that you can do if you I do this time to time. You can download a Chrome extension that blocks your Twitter feed so that you can DM people and you can tweet, but you don't have a feed that gets you sucked in. Of course, the disadvantage to all of this is that you're less plugged into the general zeitgeist around crypto, and the trend, like micro trends that happen from month to month. But to me, it's well worth the trade-off. It lets me actually, make my art and kind of keep doing what I really care about, which is like pushing my art forward, growing as an artist, and contributing to the digital art space.
Those were great. I think I'm gonna use those, especially now we're recording on July, and I think during holidays are needed to unplug. So thank you for the tips.
It's interesting in a permissionless space that is blockchain art. It's kind of nice to have permission to do something like that. It's absolutely, it's nice to hear. So I appreciate you sharing that. Emily, it's been a true pleasure for Nifty and I. I always love connecting and talking about your art. I talk about it all the time without you, so I figure it's nice to get your perspective also. Is there any closing remarks you would like to share with the listenership?
Just thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Nifty, for having me on this podcast. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to listen, to hear a little bit more insight around my art.
For any of those who are not following Emily already, please follow Emily on, ironically, Twitter or X at Emily Xie, which is XIE. So that's Emily with a Y, XXIE. Thank you for your time today. Truly appreciate it. It's been such an honor to dig even further into your art and understand the creation and the ideation behind the art. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
If you liked any of that content from Emily, I appreciate her sharing her passion, her direction, her inspiration, and all the stories behind her art. It's extremely generous of Emily, and thank you so much for your time. Please follow the SquiggleDAO on your favorite platform, like and repost this content if you found it at all valuable. And heck, join the SquiggleDAO Discord. There's an open section, and there are plenty of patrons there ready, willing, and able to help you with any of your Squiggle-related questions. Please leave us a comment. Feel free to send us a DM. We're always here looking to improve the content and always looking for ways to improve. So please reach out to us. We love engaging. Thank you so much for your time if you made it to this point, and have a good night.
Thanks for listening to the SquiggleDAO podcast, which has been brought to you by Niftyfy. Niftyfy is the pioneer of the entire NFT lending market. Their platform has the deepest liquidity, which usually means you can get the best terms. They also have no auto-liquidation risk. As long as you repay the loan before maturity, you get your asset back. Get more flexibility on your finances, take advantage of any opportunities, and make your NFTs work for you. Niftyfy has done over $500 million in total loan volume since launching in 2020 and has had over 60,000 loans with zero security incidents. Head to niftyfy.com and try lending today.
The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional or financial advice. The hosts and guests are not licensed financial advisors, accountants, or lawyers. The content is based on personal experiences, opinions, and research and its accuracy, completeness, and timeliness cannot be guaranteed.